Welcome to the Creative Adventure Podcast, an artist's guide to modern freelancing. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 3 of the Creative Adventure Podcast. My name is John Jagsney, and today we're going to be talking about character creation, how we create the character for ourselves as artists or creators or whatever you want to call yourself, and being a freelancer in that vein. So when we think about some of our favorite superheroes, characters, or people in pop culture, they don't have a traditional 9 to 5 job. They probably are doing gig-based work. Like Batman, he's technically, realistically doing gig-based work. No one asks him to do that, but he's doing it anyways. He's doing a gig, accomplishes the task, etc. So outside of the DC Comics universe, it's worth considering things like Dungeons and Dragons, World of Warcraft, Skyrim, other fantasy games, whatever is your preference, game of choice. When you pick one of those games, whatever your game is, you choose a class: a warrior, mage, rogue, cleric, bard, whatever else. And these classes have specific roles to help the party out: healers, tanks, DPS. I play DPS. I pretty much exclusively play a rogue and warrior, but that's besides the point. You take on these roles, and I believe that most people take on their preferences to being a mage, priest, warrior, whatever it is, because they have certain strengths, certain personality traits about them that makes them interested in performing that role. So as a freelancer, an artist, a creator, you probably have strengths that are better for your skill set than other things. Whether you're an illustrator, you probably know more about line language and composition and weight of line or shape, versus if you're a photographer or a cinematographer, you probably know how to compose an image and lighting, etc. So when it comes to freelancing, you have specific strengths and weaknesses. In an RPG, we basically have to consider, like, how are we going to best serve the party? And also, how do we best serve the work? I've been thinking a lot about this concept, and I'm trying to put together a way to create a character sheet for this. But if we take a step back away from freelancing right now and just go back to the original definition of freelancing, it came from a book, Ivanhoe, in 1820, where the term freelance was used to describe a mercenary who would fight for whichever nation or person paid them the most. And I like this definition because it reminds me of some of my favorite characters: Din Djarin, the Mandalorian, Geralt of Rivia, John Wick, etc. I like the definition of being a freelancer because, yes, we do receive money from the highest bidder, but ultimately, the Mandalorian, Geralt, John Wick, they are very skilled at what they do. And in the modern age, I think it is extremely valuable to be honorable, truthful, have authentic passion for the work. And when you do those things as a modern creator, not fight people as in some of the fantasy characters, but you are honorable. You follow through with what you say you're going to do. You are very skilled at what you do. You're very passionate about what you do. John Wick maybe wasn't passionate, which is why he left, but you're at least skilled at it. And if you remember from Batman: The Dark Knight, when the Joker is talking to the gang meeting, he says, if you're good at something, never do it for free. So, all that being said, being a freelancer in the modern age, I think is something we can turn into a very successful career and a very successful life path, but it involves defining who you are. So, part one is done. We're going to take a quick break and start thinking about how we can be who the best version of ourselves is. Freelancers should be people who are passionate about their craft, and they should also be champions of their client. Like, you do what you do because you're good at it and you enjoy it, I would hope. But ultimately, you're there to serve your clients. Geralt wouldn't have clients if there weren't monsters to slay, and those monsters are probably wreaking havoc on those villagers. So you have to work on behalf of your clients, but your work does require you to become someone who is knowledgeable about your craft, you're wise on how to approach problems, and you have experience to help you get through those problems. Now, all that does lead into certain strengths and skill sets for each individual, and the most important part with all of that is understanding how you contribute to the world in some way. So think about classes in games like Dungeons and Dragons or World of Warcraft. You have warriors, rogues, priests, mages, paladins, and each class definition has a sort of role they do in, let's say, a dungeon, a raid, problem solving, etc. And I think all of those classes have a uh, a translation into how we approach the world in the modern day. Unfortunately, we don't have magic, but I feel like there are certain experiences that we all endure as freelancers, as artists, as creators that might represent some of those fantasy classes. So think about a warrior, for example. A warrior or a barbarian, whatever game you want to play, they're typically combining strength, brute force, knowledge of battle, and being on the front lines, wreaking havoc in glorious combat, etc. They're typically taking on a stronger, more forward role in a project. So a warrior who might use a two-handed sword, I might align a warrior with like a camera operator or a director of photography or someone who is maybe a performer. I don't want to say a director because I don't want to diminish other roles on projects, but they're typically sometimes in a leadership role. And those leadership roles aren't always the directors, but like, hey, they're making sure that everyone is fighting well together. Versus, let's say you have a hunter, and a hunter doesn't use absolute brute force. A hunter or a ranger, they're using more of a calculated approach. They're approaching all their problems with their precision and skill to execute the final task. Versus a rogue. A rogue is up close and personal, like a lone wolf, basically doing all of the roles uh, pretty much by themselves, and they do that maybe out of some overly developed sense of independence. But typically, a rogue is existing to have some sort of honor code that is based on currency, gold, exchange of value for their skill sets. I personally identify as a rogue, and one of the reasons why I manifest most with freelancing in general is because I like being a little bit of a generalist. A rogue is, in my opinion, more of a generalist because they not only have to be good at combat, but they have to be very skilled across sleight of hand, thievery, lockpicking, etc. Maybe they'll have some poisoning skills. They're very broad. Think about a mage. A mage is someone who is very knowledgeable. They have the ability to cast wicked spells or magical spells, arcane spells, etc. They might have an alignment towards a specific type of magic: frost, fire, arcane, hexing, etc. Shadow might be more of a warlock or a necromancer, but basically a mage or a warlock, they probably live closer in the realm of like the not the quite the support role, dealing damage but from afar, and using it with a masterful craft and knowledge. So I almost think of a mage of like a painter or a concept artist, where they're doing like these big sweeping design changes on the project that require a lot of skill, and study of anatomy, of composition, of lighting, and all the other classes do require that level of skill. But I feel like mages have some sort of like mysticism around their work that can't be repeated by most other classes. There's almost like a natural affinity to being a mage. I know I'm definitely not a mage. I'm closer to a rogue. And finally, we have priests. And priests are devoted to in most fantasy worlds, some sort of healing role. They're typically identified and stereotyped as like being these spiritual characters in these games. But beyond that, they're there to support. And the problem with priests in most games is that they don't really get the credit as much as they deserve, in my opinion. Because if you've ever played a barbarian or a rogue and you don't have a healer in, say, PvP combat arenas or even games like League of Legends, if you don't have a support class, it's really hard to get the best out of everyone else in the game. So if you're playing bottom lane with two AD carries, you have two hunters. Like, sure, one of them will probably do well, but it's so much easier if you have one character who is doing most of the damage, and they can continue focusing on their task because all of their healing is taken care of. They don't have to worry about taking care of themselves as much. Now, a priest, I would typically align with someone like a producer or a part of being on set where they're making sure that everyone is fed, making sure that everyone's on schedule, making sure that everyone is on time, making sure that everyone is stopping work at a reasonable hour. Being a priest or in a support role is, I think, one of the unsung heroes of most games and also real life art. Being a producer or a support role is the thing that kind of gets everyone past the finish line. So all these classes have these sort of roles that we all choose because of our own personal preferences. Like I said, I'm a rogue, but we do it, and I think it's because there's parts of us that embody those sort of personas in these games and how we see ourselves. So what I want you to think about is if you were to play a fantasy game, D&D, Warcraft, League of Legends, etc., what roles appeal to you most? Do you feel like you want to pick up a greatsword and take the challenge head on? Or do you want to be more calculated, be more of a ranger, bow and arrow? Do you want to use your knowledge in a very skillful way, be a mage? Or do you want to take on a support role and make sure that everyone else is being the best version of themselves? So think about the class that you would want to play, and what are your skills and proficiencies? Skills being like not only just how good am I at art, but do I have the ability to bring the best out of people? That is probably closer to a mage or a priest. Do you feel like you have high attention to detail? You might be closer to a rogue or a ranger. Or do you just have pure grit and determination? Then you might be closer to a barbarian. And do you want to specialize any of those skills? Those skills being, do you want to be the person that has the highest attention to detail on a project? Do you want to be a pure rogue or hunter? Do you want to be a pure director of photography where you can just get through all the long hours beyond what most people can do? Or do you take on a hybrid role? That hybrid role being you can be a leader and bring out the best part of everyone on the team, but you also know how to roll up your sleeves and get the job done too. If that's you, you might be closer to a paladin where you can take on that leadership role. You can help people get past the finish line, but you're not shy of taking a big hammer, mace, maul, etc., and getting on the front lines and getting in with the fight. So it's important to think about what are your skills And do you specialize in them or do you broaden them? So think about your class. Think about how you would want to approach a game, and then does that apply to you in real life? So there's your classes. Now I think it's worth talking about alignment. So beyond classes is alignment. And in the Dungeons and Dragons Player's Handbook, your alignment is defined as, on page 122, the moral compass that guides his or her decisions. Now, in D&D, they set it up into a grid with some traits. Those traits are lawful, neutral, and chaotic. And then we have good, neutral, and evil. And you can basically think of this like a 3x3 grid. So on the top left, you have lawful good, and on the bottom right, you have chaotic evil. And everything in between, and in the very center, you obviously have neutral, neutral, where it's just like you're kind of just being true neutral across things. And then obviously there's some gray areas for everyone. So I have a couple examples here for us to think about characters in fantasy worlds that might paint a picture of what is an alignment. So the most easiest example for lawful good would be Superman. Stand-up dude, does no evil. He has one weakness, kryptonite, but he's just generally a good dude. Another example, one of my favorite shows at the time of this recording is Arcane. Arcane Season 2 just finished, and lawful good would be Caitlyn. She's pretty much by the books, does all good, and just tries to make sure that she is a good person. She does some things that are, I don't want to say evil, but she seeks justice on some of the crimes committed by the Undercity in Piltover. So there's definitely some character traits about being lawful good that is it seeks justice, versus you might think of chaotic evil, which is just pure chaos, just like inflict harm on everyone and everything, revenge, etc. The most broad example I have is the Joker from The Dark Knight being chaotic evil, or from Arcane Season 2, you can think of Jinx. Jinx and the Joker actually are probably, and Jinx inspired by the Joker a little bit, but just pretty much evil for the sake of being evil, up until some character development for Jinx. But for the most part, you can almost think of her regressing into this purely chaotic evil state of just causing chaos. Now, neutral in the dead center would probably be closer to the trees from Lord of the Rings. There's a quote in that movie, side, I'm on nobody's side because nobody is on my side. And that overall perception and mindset is just like, hey, I'm going to be Switzerland. I'm not going to inflict harm on anyone unless anyone inflicts harm on me. A good example from Arcane might be Victor. He sought glorious revolution, but he did it without no one was either right or wrong. His primary goal was glorious evolution, regardless of anyone's alignment. So that did create some overall chaos, you could argue. But for the most part, he didn't discriminate on who got to participate in his glorious evolution. Now, I'm just going to blow through the rest of these sort of alignments so we can just start thinking about ourselves. So neutral good might be someone like Han Solo. They're generally pretty good. They don't do evil things, but they're pretty neutral as to how they get there. They might do smuggling. They might do some things that are like maybe a little bit out of the norm, but they're generally a good person. Jace from Arcane would be a good example. Chaotic good. Arcane Season 1 and 2, Vi is a good example of that because she's generally a good person. She genuinely wants to do good things. She wants equality for her life, her people, and to do that, she's not willing, or she is willing to throw hands. She's willing to get dirty and create some chaos a little bit. But it's to make sure that she wasn't discriminating on who deserved good in their life. Now, thinking about lawful neutrality being sort of like, hey, I do things by the book to make sure that we don't harm anyone, no evil, no harm, making sure that everyone's kind of just doing their thing. Heimerdinger, Professor Heimerdinger, Counselor Heimerdinger would probably be a good example of being lawful neutral. Because of his long life, he probably had an understanding of that there was no good and evil. It's just like, how do we maintain society in a good way, versus chaotic neutral, doing things on behalf of myself is generally as long as I'm not hurting anyone. I don't really care if I hurt anyone as long as I'm not deliberately doing evil. I'm generally a good person, but I will do it in a way that's a little bit chaotic. A good example of that might be Captain Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean, and there's a quote in one of his movies. There's been so many now. That quote is, "A dishonest man you can always trust to be dishonest. Honestly, it's the honest ones you want to watch out for, because you can never predict when they're going to do something incredibly stupid." Now, Captain Jack Sparrow, he's pretty chaotic, but he's not really discriminating against who he is chaotic to. He just wants to live his life, do his thing. I did personally not make the arcane alignment chart. Thank you, Internet. Echo probably falls closer to the chaotic neutral, just wanting to live in peace, do his own thing. Now, the very bottom row of this 3x3 grid of alignment is evil. Now, evil is not something we should align with as freelancers, but it's worth considering just so we know that we are not doing unsavory things. So, lawful evil may be Darth Vader, to be honest. He did things under some moral code of justice, but committing evil for justice, committing evil. He was selfish early on, but his goal was to push the empire. Another example of lawful evil would be Silco. Silco being, he's pretty messed up, but his goal of villainy was to push for equality for his nation of Zon. And that general mindset forced him to do some evil things, and he did do things out of vengeance for Vander and how he was treated, and his beliefs. But I won't give any spoilers. I will not do spoilers. But there is the way he approached his evilness in the beginning of Arcane Season 1. He was doing things because he wanted to overthrow Vander and put forth the Undercity as like a leading power that had equality. It wasn't just freaking discriminated against and pushed down by the upper city. Now, neutral evil would be Singed, or the Alien or Predator from the 1980s movies, Alien or Predator, or any of the following sequels. They pretty much just do things because they have their own motive for themselves, and that they're not really evil to anyone. They're just trying to look out for themselves. So Singed obviously did his scientific research for his own reasons. The Alien from Alien was there for survival, and Predator just hunted because it was fun and sport. It wasn't evil towards anyone or anything. It was doing mean things, but it was purely for itself. And then chaotic evil, we have Jinx or the Joker, and those two characters just do wildly crazy things. Now, in today's modern age, we shouldn't be evil. We should champion our clients, and we should put our work forward in a way that best fits with our alignment to putting out good work, Our alignment should be to be good, genuinely help people, genuinely provide value to our clients, but coming from a place of maybe being a little neutral so we can be freelancers. Now, if you're being purely lawful good, you might actually point a shoe towards your foot and pull the trigger, shoot yourself in the foot, because you may find yourself in a place where you don't have anything. You have to act on behalf of yourself in addition to your client. Think about Han Solo. He was a smuggler doing it for money, did good work, and he was done. Now, he did become a little bit more good and did come back and help. Han Solo did. It's not always a black and white, you must be lawful or neutral good. You should genuinely be a good person. So I will share my alignment, and that I probably live somewhere closer to neutral good and chaotic good. Not purely neutral good, because there are some times on projects in which I will communicate what I think would be best for the work and the project to the client, even though it may not be exactly what the client wants, because I care more about what my client's outcome is. And sometimes I will suggest, hey, we do a shorter video that is maybe less effort on my part and in vertical format, because modern social media ecosystems really encourage short form vertical content, and the clients may not think about that nowadays. So I will, even if they don't ask for it, I will kind of gently push it and sell it. And it's a little chaotic at times, and sometimes I will do spec work just to communicate to my clients, like, hey, I care more about the work and making sure that you get the outcome that you want, regardless how you feel right now. I do it in a very gentle and polite way, but it's a little chaotic because I care more about the outcome for my client, not making them feel good all the time. Obviously, be a good person to work with, and listen when when your clients do have a specific need. Make sure that you're being empathetic to those needs. But sometimes I will do it in a way that's like, hey, we're going to make sure we put the work first and the outcome for the work first. So when it comes to alignment, there's one quote from a movie, Pinocchio. I can't pronounce it. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. The director, that his last name ends in Del Toro. Cricket says, "I'll try my best," and that's the best anyone can do. And generally speaking, when it comes to alignment, regardless of your morality and your moral code, just do your best. That's the best way to define alignment. When you're just doing a good thing to your clients, to the work, to make sure that your clients are getting the best outcome, that is the way in which you have the best alignment. Doing your best and genuinely doing good work and providing good value will genuinely put you in a good space for your alignment. So ultimately what I'm trying to say here is that whether you are maybe closer to neutral good, maybe you're closer to lawful good, it's always best to provide a positive experience for the people who you work with, and be honest and fair. And genuinely being a good person is genuinely being honest and fair. You can do that neutrally, but I think being a good person and being generous will lead you to a better freelance lifestyle with maybe more success, maybe more fulfillment in the long run. So all that being said, alignment should be pretty straightforward, but it's worth talking about because it's very easy to get into the neutral area and very easy to get into the evil area, where if you were to find a project, find a client where you could very much take advantage of clients, you may not ever book that client again, because that person would feel as if you stole from them. A good example for this, I think, would be using AI art. If you take a client and they pay you like $10,000 and you generate an image of AI generated art, that client paid that money and you don't give it back to them if they ask for it, that is pretty evil. In the same way that, like, even if they don't ask for it and they don't know anything, but they pay significantly out of pocket, sooner or later they're going to discover that your business practice was deliberately advantageous. Making $10,000 in an hour is maybe not fair. maybe making $1,000 in an hour could be fair, depending on the value that you provide to the client. Because ultimately, pricing is very hard to quantify, because pricing is very much based on what the client's value of that is. And always, you should always generally give more value to your clients through your work than the value that you receive through monetary compensation, because that's how arbitrage works. Clients are generally trying to create more value with the work that they get. So you should in turn give a lot of value, and value can come in the form of their output. It could be in the form of their experience of the work that you create. And if you are evil, as in you deliberately use immoral services or take advantage of people, you probably won't get a whole lot of work. So it's worth sharing that being generally fair and honest is a good thing for a freelancer, because that's how you get booked again. And if you lie about delivery time, if you lie about rates and charge more than the project is worth, then you may not get booked again, and you're not going to get you're not going to fight superheroes if you're ever evil. But I do believe that the world naturally corrects itself for the people who may do some unsavory business practices. So that being said, alignment, it's not all cut and dry. Be a good, honest, and fair person, but it is possible to be evil, and evilness and villainy in the freelance world does manifest as unfair pricing, predatory business practices, and it does come together in doing things that just maybe deliberately harm people. So don't do those things. All that being said, that really just does come down to your ideals. What kind of ideals do you want to live by? And we'll talk about that next. An ideal on your character sheet in Dungeons and Dragons is basically the things that you believe in most strongly. It's the fundamental moral code or ethical principles that compel you to act as you do. Ideals encompass everything from your life goals to your core belief systems. So, in the D&D book, ideals may answer any of these questions. What are the principles that you will never betray? What would prompt you to make sacrifices? What drives you to act and guide your goals and ambitions? And what is the single most important thing you strive for? You can choose any ideals you like, but your character's alignment is a good place to start defining them. So your ideals as a freelancer should be something that you really consider. What are your core belief systems? So in the D&D handbook, there is more than a handful of ideals. That could be respect. You respect people, rich, poor, etc. Community, you care for the group. Do you have responsibility? Do you make sure that you put people first, and you're committed to your team, your clients, the people who are there? Do you have high goals and aspirations? Do you want to own your own business? Do you want to be someone who is completely self-driven? Do you idealize fairness? I personally idealize fairness, very much so. We all do work, and we want to make sure that we share it. All for one, one for all. Everyone shares in the rewards of the project. Do you idealize knowledge? Do you really appreciate knowing things? Do you seek new skills, new education? Or do you seek self-improvement? What your ideals are should drive you as a modern freelancer and artist or creator, because you can be respectful and put community first. You can be driven and make sure that you also are educating yourself. So think about, do you want to be respectful? Do you want to put community first, responsibility, people, aspirations, etc.? Now, it's a little broad, and we could go on this in the D&D handbook, but taking all of these principles from fantasy role-playing games, it's been an exercise for me putting all of this together, because not everything is going to be so deep as I'm a barbarian that was had my house burned down and now I'm on a revenge quest. Most of the time, modern stories are not quite as interesting. It's important to have aspirations. If you're listening to this podcast, I'm assuming you have some interest in defining your own destiny. So think about what really drives you, your core belief systems, and what is really going to push you to be the best version of yourself. So, with that said, we're thinking about bonds. And bonds represent a character's connection to the people around you, the places, events, etc. And they tie a little bit to your background being like where you came from, what's your backstory. And unfortunately, in the real world, most backgrounds aren't super exciting. Unfortunately, you're not a night elf from Teldrassil on a quest through Darnassus and making your way through the wetlands to get to Elwyn Forest and all that. You don't have these crazy long stories. A lot of the time, we grew up as kids playing video games. We picked up art and we went to art school, maybe. I didn't go to art school, I went to school for economics. I have a long-winded background of different paths I've tried, but ultimately your bonds are defined as like your physical or emotional ties that dictate your behaviors. So, what are your bonds? Is that family? Is that a special place? Do you have specific possessions? In the D&D handbook, there is these questions: whom do you care most about? To what place do you feel a special connection? What is your most treasured possession? Those three questions can help dictate, hey, what are you bonded to? What actually pushes your life forward? And why do you make these decisions? Because you can have a strong alignment, but like, who are you doing it for? Is it for to have a certain lifestyle? Do you want to live in a certain place? Like I live in Southern California, and I'm bonded to Southern California. While I did grow up in Connecticut, I love being in Southern California because I've made a lot of new friends along the way, and I don't want to keep losing friendships. I'm bonded to this special place because of these special people. I typically try to not be stuff oriented. I like my cameras. But maybe you're the opposite. Maybe you don't care about a place, but you care about travel. What are you bonded to? And it could very well be experiences. In the D&D book, they didn't really talk about experiences, but you could be bonded to experiencing a full life, whether that's travel, whether that's trying new foods, etc. We've obviously talked a lot about alignment and bonds and ideals, and unfortunately, we as human beings, we are not purely flawless creatures, which means we do have flaws. And a flaw in character creation for role playing games, it represents some sort of like vice, compulsion, or fear of something, someone that dictates maybe some of your negative traits. And it's worth considering that too. What are your weaknesses? Where do you find your most negative personality traits? Some things that are worth considering when it comes to creating your character in Dungeons and Dragons is what enrages you. What what's the one person, concept, or event that is terrifying to you? What are your vices? And I'll be fully transparent. Some of my vices are food. Some of my vices are addiction. I do have a very addictive personality, and I have to keep a lot of that in check. And as I go through my life, I have developed ideals of being someone who is determined and has aspirations, and as such, I have to keep some of my natural instincts in check. Sometimes I just want to lay in bed and be on my phone. Think about some of your favorite characters. We don't see it on camera, but they might have some flaws or vices. I don't want to make it grim and dark. It might be drug addiction for some characters. It might be being too married to video games. I personally have a hard time relinquishing creative control. I'm slow to trust other people because I fear being taken advantage of. I have challenging relationships with food and I struggle with binge eating. I overindulge sometimes, and if I do, I punish myself unjustly. And sometimes I say yes too often. And despite my best efforts, I leave myself unavailable to things that are important to me because I say yes too often. And those are some of my flaws. And I wanted to share those with you because I want you to really think about, like, what are your flaws? So think about the questions I mentioned earlier. What enrages you? What is one person, concept, or event that you're afraid of? And what are your vices? Flaws are important because it does help us navigate being a modern artist because we know how to work with our flaws. Your background is the thing that really just creates your backstory. And your background really comes down to how you spend your time, how you spent your time when you were younger, and what that made you today. Because every person is unique, and because everyone is special, you could argue that no one is special. That sounds really grim. We're quoting Syndrome from The Incredibles. Once everyone is a hero, no one is. But I do think that your background does make you who you are. And I don't want to make it dark and grim and sad because we are all special in our own way. It's about how do we manifest that into a really good, meaningful contribution to our life. So, my background, starting playing too much World of Warcraft, I was overweight for a period of time, playing way too many video games. That did give me a lot of grit and determination, and it taught me a lot of things about myself that I can be stronger sometimes. And as I was thinking about background, I was thinking about like some of the strong things that you need to have as a modern artist. And grit, I think, is one of them. We're going to do a separate podcast on grit very soon. But it's not talent. Grit isn't luck. It's not how intensely uh, you want something. It's how well you can persevere through things. And I think being a modern artist does require you to have a large amount of perseverance. And that is one trait that is very important. So we'll talk about grit in another future podcast. But think about your background and how that has contributed to who you are today. And that very well mean that you were an artist when you were younger, but now your skill set best serves you as more of a support role. Maybe you're better at producing projects, managing projects. Maybe you are still a really good artist. Maybe your background has made you really good at working with people. Just think about how your upbringing best led to the skills that you have today. So, with all that being said, we're going to end this podcast with thinking about the 5 character stats 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, excuse me, in Dungeons and Dragons. And those 5 traits in Dungeons and Dragons and most other fantasy RPGs are strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Now, as I was putting together some of this content, I had some friends say, like, oh, you should find traits that are actually applicable to the real world. And I disagree. I believe it is important to have some level of physical strength. In the modern age, we don't need to have a whole lot of it. But there are some people in certain roles where being physically strong is actually a very useful skill. Most people will probably have much higher intelligence and wisdom and charisma, and most people get paid the most amount of money for those 3 traits: intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. But ignoring strength, dexterity, and constitution, I think, is a fool's errand because we as human beings do have to perform physical tasks on occasion, and we have to maintain it to have a life with longevity and a high quality of life. So, strength. What is strength? It's your physical strength. It's being able to lift heavy objects, and that could be cameras, could be equipment, could be computers, etc. Having strength is valuable as a modern artist, but despite what some people told me. Dexterity is your physical agility, flexibility, hand-eye coordination, etc. I think dexterity is important because if you take an illustrator who doesn't have the dexterity to draw a line correctly, then their illustration skills aren't going to be super great. I think dexterity is one of the things that can be learned and it can be trained. It can also be degraded. And we no longer have to have sleight of hand skills to pick locks and use a bow and arrow, but dexterity is an important skill. Constitution is your level of endurance. It's effectively contributing to your health pool in Dungeons and Dragons, and your constitution is in the modern age. How long can you be productive? What is your stamina like? What is your level of endurance? How long can you perform a task at a high level of intensity? And I think that constitution can be trained. It can be trained, I think, through exercise. I think it can also be trained through going through long sessions of work and getting maybe a little bit longer here and there. Obviously, find a balance with life. Don't always work yourself into the ground, but sometimes you do have to work long hours, and that's just part of being human. Now, in today's modern age, we are a knowledge-based working class most of the time, so intelligence is very important. That's going to be your reasoning, your memory, your logic skills. Now, that's pretty self-explanatory. It's like, how intelligent are you? Do you know how to use complex software? Do you know how to solve problems? Do you know how to code? All these things are important to being an artist in the modern world, because you have to be intelligent to use 3D software, 2D software, even be intelligent to illustrate anatomy or sculpt anatomy. You have to have just straight up knowledge for that. Now, wisdom is work experience. You get work experience through working more. And through working more, you get a higher attention to detail. Your perception of art is higher. I also believe that your wisdom contributes to your perception of how you perceive the world, being how you absorb marketing content, how you absorb content in general, how you absorb art, and its effect on you, and how you can translate that to other people, and how you can translate that to your work. So wisdom is effectively perception, and charisma is pretty much charisma. Do you know how to communicate well? Do you have good communication skills? Do you have the ability to influence? Do you have the ability to de-escalate a intense situation? There's a lot of ways in which the modern world does create a need for high charisma. And I will say that your charisma can very much contribute to how much money you make, because you can persuade people that you can do things. As much as I hate to say it, I do think that charisma is perhaps the easiest way to leverage into becoming a financially successful artist, but I don't think it is going to fully lead to a purely fulfilled artist or creator in the modern age. I believe that you must have some level of strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, and wisdom, in addition to your charisma, to actually create fulfilling work that makes you feel like you've made something meaningful and worthwhile to the world. So a couple examples of skills or traits that may lead to specific jobs as creatives in the modern age. So a director of photography, someone who works with cameras, heavy lenses, lights, etc., they may lean into their strength and dexterity skills. They need to be able to maneuver the camera. They need to be able to lift the camera and hold it for a long period of time. They probably need to have a good amount of constitution or endurance to get through their long days. A motion designer probably has higher constitution and intelligence. Constitution being not pure, absolute athletic endurance, but constitution being able to think about a complex task for a very long time, and that overall constitution leads to long hours at the computer. And you also have to be really intelligent. You have to be able to understand keyframes and the graph editor and how that creates visual language, and turn abstract ideas into moving objects or moving images that communicate an idea. So being a motion designer is constitution and intelligence, and being a good producer is the combination of experience from past jobs, knowing what it takes to accomplish a project and having the wisdom to manifest that project into existence, and charisma as in to bring the best part out of every person on the project. So a producer will probably lean closer to wisdom and charisma. Now, when it comes to thinking about your 5 traits, where do you spend most of your time? Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? And how does that lean into what you want to be doing as a modern creative and artist? And we can obviously talk about other parts of the Dungeons and Dragons character sheet if you're familiar. There's proficiencies, proficiencies being your very specific skills. That could be your 3D animation, illustration, graphic design, teaching, technology, etc. And we won't cover that today, but what I want you to really think about is referring back to the very beginning of this podcast. Think about your personality traits as you as an individual and how that influences your freelance career. Because I want you to think about how you can leverage the best parts about yourself into something that is meaningful and fulfilling for the freelance lifestyle that you're looking for. Think about your backstory. Does your backstory, how you grew up and what you aspired to do, does that make you a stronger person? What sort of bonds? What bonds you to your work? Is it to make more money so you can contribute to your family, your friends? Is it to live in a certain place? And what ideals do you want to live by? Do you want to be respectful? Do you want to be knowledgeable? Do you want to be known as a good artist? And understand your flaws. Your flaws being what holds you back and how you can best work with them. And I want you to think about how you want to approach the world as a freelancer. So, you could be a warrior, you could be a rogue, you could be a priest, mage, hunter, in the same way that you could be a director of photography. You can be a freelance 3D motion designer or 2D motion designer. You could be a fine art painter. You could be a producer. You could be a hybrid of all of those things. And just think about who you would play in World of Warcraft or Dungeons and Dragons, and be curious on whether that would influence your actual skills as a modern artist in today's world. So, those are most of my thoughts on Dungeons and Dragons character sheets and how it applies to the real world. I hope this little analogy gave you something to think about and gave you some inspiration to approach your projects in a new and meaningful way. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more or have some suggestions, do leave me a review. Those reviews will help so that I know that I'm creating content that is valuable to you. I hope this time was worth it because you're not getting it back, but I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. And we will end today's podcast with a D20 roll. Let's see how it is going to be for your day today. Ooh, that's a 3. Not super great this time, but that's okay because we know how to roll with the punches as freelancers and play the cards we are dealt. Until next time, my name is John Jagsney. Thank you for listening to the Creative Adventure Podcast. And until next time, may the dice ever roll in your favor. Take care.